Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ty Gregory, and I serve as the CEO of JCRC Bay Area. It's good to have so many folks on the call with us. Thank you for being here. We decided to put this important session together because it's crunch time at our state capitol. We have a number of critical priorities for the Jewish community that JPAC and the Legislative Jewish Caucus have been working very hard on. And now is the time to turn to all of you, all across the state. We need you to respond to the action alerts, show up, advocate. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. This is an all hands on deck moment for our community. And so this is about readying us for the fight in the weeks ahead. And we're grateful that you've joined us to learn more about these critical bills. And in a few minutes, you're going to hear from many of the authors. So thank you for being here. So I'd like to turn it over to my friend, Assemblymember Gabriel, to kick things off, the co-chair of the Jewish Caucus, who I had the pleasure of organizing a trip to Israel, a solidarity mission in February, a very powerful experience. And I just want to thank him for all of his leadership for the Jewish community across our state. Assemblymember, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ty. Good afternoon, everybody. Jesse Gabriel, really proud to represent the San Fernando Valley and also really proud to be chair of the California Legislative Jewish Caucus. Let me just first say thank you to Ty and to David, all of the folks at JPAC and the partner organizations, Dr. Anita Friedman and others who are such wonderful leaders for our community and doing so much work in partnership with the Jewish Caucus on issues that are important to all of us. And also, let me say a really big thank you to all of you that have joined us today. As Ty mentioned, this is crunch time. We are at the end of our legislative session. We, as members of the Jewish Caucus, certainly have been feeling this moment in time, this very challenging and difficult, and I would say really unprecedented for my lifetime moment for our Jewish community. But one thing that we have taken incredible solace in and drawn incredible strength from is the solidarity that our community has shown, the way that we show up for each other. I very much believe that that is part of our secret to 4,000 years of survival, is the way that when times get tough, and they often do for the Jewish community, we do not hesitate to show up for each other, and we show up for each other in really beautiful ways. So I want to thank all of the organizational leaders who are part of JPAC, David, who is leading it, for their work. And also, in particular, thank my colleagues who have very proudly and very bravely decided to author bills that are so critical to the safety of our community, to the future of our state. In particular, Assemblymember Chavez Zbur, Assemblymember Laura Friedman, and Senator Glazer. I want to thank them. They are doing this heavy lifting on behalf of the Jewish Caucus and really on behalf of our entire community, on behalf of the state, of the kids of our state. So thank you to my colleagues for their extraordinary work. You're going to hear this from all of them. You're going to hear this from Ty and David and Anita and everybody else, but we need you in Sacramento. This is the moment to show up. This is the moment to be heard. This is the moment to make your voice count. I promise you, it is easy. It is accessible. You do not need prior experience to do it, and it will make a really big difference. And so I just want to say thank you in advance for your engagement and your activism as you are reading the news, hopefully not too much of it on Twitter, and feeling all of the craziness of this moment, the way that the world is broken, the heaviness of the world. I promise you that you will feel good by getting engaged and working in partnership. And I have taken so much energy and inspiration from the work of our Jewish community leaders, and in particular from my colleagues in the Jewish Caucus. We have a text thread that is going 24/7, and the work that they are doing to protect our community really leaves me inspired. So thank you to all of you. I will turn it back over, and I hope to see many, many, many of you in Sacramento in the coming weeks. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Gabriel, and thank you, Ty, for opening us off. And welcome, everybody. This is, as Assemblymember Gabriel just said, a critical time for us all to be together and to take action. So I'll take us through today, and we've got some incredible speakers who are with us. But before we jump in, I just want to share what to expect in this hour together. First, we are sponsoring 6 major bills of particular importance to our community. 3 of those bills are Assembly Bill 2507 by Assemblymember Laura Friedman, which creates an interest-free loan program to support low-income and homeless college students. This is something that Jewish Free Loan Association, a member of JPAC, would lead statewide. We also have SB 85 by Senator Scott Wiener, which provides critical case management services to newly arrived refugees, which HIAS and many of our Jewish Family Service agencies lead. And we have SB 1277 by Senator Henry Stern, which establishes a statewide program to develop curricula and train teachers about Holocaust and genocide education, work that is currently being led by our San Francisco-based Jewish Family and Children's Services. And we're doing all that we can behind the scenes to ensure that these bills make it across the finish line. But we're going to spend today focusing on our other three bills that address ethnic studies and campus anti-Semitism, because they are facing particularly strong opposition. And we need really all of your hands on deck to push these bills through the remainder of the legislative process. So we're joined today by the authors of these three consequential bills. We'll go through them one by one, and a JPAC leader will facilitate a discussion with the lawmaker authoring the bill. And our goals of each discussion are to give you a better understanding of what the bill will do so that you can become an effective advocate, what challenges facing the bill are, so that you are aware of the stakes, and what we need to do to get these bills signed into law so that you can take action. After we go through each of these three bills, we'll offer concrete ways that you can take action both right away and over the next several weeks. It's an ambitious agenda to try to accomplish in an hour, but I believe we can do it. So let's jump in, and we're going to start with AB 2925 about campus anti-discrimination trainings. So I'm pleased to introduce Joy Sisiski, CEO of the Bay Area Jewish Federation, who will be in conversation with the bill's author, my dear friend, Assemblymember Laura Friedman.
Great. Thank you, David. I'm thrilled to be here with Assemblymember Laura Friedman, who represents Burbank, Glendale, and Los Angeles. She's an active member of the legislators' Jewish Caucus, an incredible Jewish advocate and leader. She will unfortunately be leaving her state office at the end of this year, but to represent us in DC in Congress. In the meantime, she's authoring two of the 6 highest priority JPAC bills. David mentioned the interest-free loan bill, but we're going to spend our time talking about AB 2925, which addresses campus anti-Semitism. We know that anti-Semitic incidences have skyrocketed in the aftermath of October 7th. And according to the state Attorney General, Jews are now the second most targeted community in California, behind only the Black community. Not only have college campuses really been a hotbed of intimidation and misinformation, but they're also a springboard for the next generation of leaders. And while colleges are building out robust anti-discrimination and DEI trainings to address hate targeting vulnerable communities, we're finding that the Jewish community is often excluded from those trainings. So, Assemblymember, will you start by giving us a high-level overview of what the bill does?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all, and thank you so much for your partnership. And I want to especially thank everyone who's joined us today, who are, I know so many of you in your own communities dealing with the rise in anti-Semitism and hatred. And I just really appreciate your being here in community with everyone today. This bill came about because as anti-Semitism has been increasing over the past several years, and it has been for several years now, we were starting to hear about issues on our institutions of higher learning and our college campuses. And what was disturbing to me was that we had both faculty and students who went to their appropriate agencies and departments on their college campuses asking for help, saying there has been an anti-Semitic incident, or they felt that there was coursework that was anti-Semitic, or whatever it was. And what they were discovering was that there was not a lot of understanding of what anti-Semitism even looked like, because the DEI, the diversity and inclusion departments and trainings, very often, and in the vast majority of times, not only didn't offer training in anti-Semitism, they didn't have anybody in the departments who were competent in understanding incidences when they occurred. So what our bill does is it creates a requirement that if a college campus is going to have a DEI or any kind of anti-discrimination training, that they can train on whatever groups they want, but they must also include the top 5 most targeted groups in the state of California. So the logic is simple. If your community is most vulnerable to hate crimes, you need to be doing more to dismantle such hate on campuses, and that starts with education. The Attorney General every year in California is required to put out hate crime data, and that's in California and across the country. And every year, year over year, the data consistently shows that the Jewish community is one of the top 5 most targeted groups. But as you said, Joy, we're seeing DEI trainings teach about other vulnerable groups, which is great. But to me, it's inexcusable that they don't include our community. So AB 2925 is intended to address this lapse in training.
I appreciate that. Thank you for giving that overview. So you talked about the Attorney General hate crime data, and I know that the Attorney General recently released data from 2023. Can you tell us about the numbers and how they compare to past years?
So every year, the way that the data is released, first of all, is that it typically gets released in early summer that for the year prior. So this was about the last year's data. And that means that the schools would have the summers to plan for their fall trainings because the data comes out early summer. So it does give the schools time to bring in appropriate people and to plan what their trainings are going to be. So from 2022 to 2023, we saw an overall decrease in reported hate crimes across the state. They decreased by about 7%. However, unfortunately, there was about an increase reported in hate crimes against three communities: the Jewish community, the Muslim community, and the LGBTQ plus communities. Notably, the Jewish community jumped from being the fourth to being the second most targeted group, with anti-Semitic events increasing 53%, from 189 to 289 in 2023. And remember, these are only the crimes that are reported. We know that that's really the tip of the iceberg because most of the time people are not reporting these. Anti-Semitic events made up 15% of all hate crimes in California last year. The only group targeted more times than us last year was the Black community. And of course, there's a much smaller members of the Jewish community than there are of these other ethnic groups. So we are disproportionately way overrepresented when it comes to hate crimes.
So this kind of all seems pretty straightforward to me. The Jewish community is the second most targeted community in California and has been in the top 5 for many, many years. And we're subject to 15% of all hate crimes, despite the fact that we make up less than 3% of the state's population. Yet we continue to see college campuses that are offering DEI and other anti-discrimination trainings, but they still don't include anti-Semitism. So can you tell us a little bit about the challenges that you faced in developing the bill and getting it to where it is in the process?
Yeah, thank you. So originally, I wanted to just explicitly say in statute that anti-Semitism has to be included because we're kind of always in the top 5. So it made sense to me. We seem to be left out for whatever reason. But as we went through the legislative process, we have very smart legal and policy minds who work in the Capitol who tell us what is and what is not acceptable, be it because of precedent or because of federal law. And so we were advised that we can't call out any one group in statute, which makes sense. And instead, we need to use universal language. So we work with JPAC to comb through years of data and to confirm what we thought was true, that Jews consistently join the Black, Latino, AAPI, and LGBTQ communities among the most targeted groups in California. We are consistently in that top 5, unfortunately. The other 4 groups are almost always included in DEI trainings, but the Jewish community is not. And so we felt that they should all be included. So the only problem was how we overcame this issue. So we continue through the process to just basically make it the top 5 groups. CARE, which is the California Arab and Islamic group, came out in opposition to our legislation and began testifying at each hearing against the bill on the Senate side, unfortunately. Now, they wanted the Muslim community to be included by statute, and they argued that Islamophobia has increased significantly as well. And I agree that it's increased, and we certainly want all hatred to be combated on campus. But the core intent of the bill was to address the fact that anti-Semitism rather than Islamophobia is typically ignored in DEI training. There's actually Islamophobia is almost always taught in DEI trainings, we discovered. So we think it'd be great for DEI trainings to have Islamophobia, and many do, but the reality is that the numbers really don't pan out to include it in statute, even if we were able to call out specific groups. In the 2023 Attorney General report, there were 40 anti-Muslim incidents was reported, which did increase significantly from the 25 the year prior, but it still comes in way lower than anti-Semitism and other incidences, and much lower than any other group in the top 5. So we're working on language to clarify that, to make sure that people understand that you can still include whatever community you want. In my community, for instance, we might want to include anti-Armenian hate crimes. You know, in different parts of the state, you're going to want to include groups that may not be in the top 5, but we want to, and because we think it's important to send that message, to make it clear that because there is anti-Islamic hate crimes, we want to make sure that schools do include it and they don't drop that from their programs. But the core of the bill remains that if you are one of the most 5 targeted groups, you must be included. You must be. And so I don't think that it's fair to say that that a group should be killing this bill when we're not calling out any group by name. We made sure to make this neutral and just to make it about the top 5. And we are adding language to clarify that you should also make sure that you include any groups that are the subject of hate crimes on your campus.
Thank you. One of the other bills that David mentioned at the top that we're working on is Senator Stern's bill to formally establish a teachers collaborative to develop Holocaust and genocide curricula for schools that aren't teaching the requirements that are up to state standards. And I've really been struck that CARE and Jewish Voices for Peace are opposing that bill too, on the grounds that we shouldn't teach about the Holocaust or Rwanda or the Cambodian or Native American genocides if we also don't teach about, quote, current genocide in Gaza. So now we're not spending much time on that bill today because it's facing less opposition due to the fact that their argument is obviously far-fetched, but I can't help but notice a pattern here from these groups that are opposing virtually all of our priority bills, which is if we don't get everything we want, then no one else can get what they need. And it doesn't really seem like a strong argument because what we're advocating for isn't really at odds with what they want. We support bills and other initiatives all the time that help other vulnerable communities, including the Muslim community, without insisting that we also help the Jewish community. So while that seems obvious to me, I'm wondering how your colleagues are taking it, and what has been the response to CARE's opposition from the legislature?
So CARE didn't begin to really oppose our bill until the bill passed out of the Assembly and got to the Senate. Prior to that, we had a lot of success. It passed out of the Assembly policy committees unanimously and then passed off the Assembly floor with a 73-0 vote with 7 abstentions. So there were people who didn't want to vote for it, but nobody voted no. And we had bipartisan support. Now in the legislature, when people abstain, it's really the same as voting no. It means the same thing in terms of the vote count. It's just sort of a softer way of saying it. So if someone is present and they don't vote, you should take that as a no. Both in the policy committees and on the floor. But it ends up being the same thing because you still need the same number of votes to pass a bill out. Whether they vote no or they abstain, it comes to the same thing mathematically. Now, the bill has still done fairly well in the Senate, despite CARE's opposition. It passed out of the Senate Education and Judiciary Committees, but we have still had abstentions, and we've had people who have voiced concerns with the bill. And we've had people who voted yes, but put pressure on us to take amendments that we are not going to take. You know, they've said, I'm voting yes today, but I'm not going to vote yes on the floor unless you make CARE happy and take CARE's amendments. And, you know, we do not call out, and the bill does not say that you have to teach anti-Semitism. The bill says you must teach the top 5 groups. So it doesn't make sense that we would take an amendment to say you have to do the top 5 groups plus you have to include Islamophobia. It's not consistent with the language that's in the bill. So we are not going to take that language, and we don't see why we should. Now, Islamophobia, as I said, is often included in DEI trainings, and we want to make sure that it's clear that they should continue to do that. We are not going to require or call out any particular group. We are making a good faith effort to accommodate our colleagues, and we're optimistic that the bill will pass out of the Appropriations Committee in a few weeks, but you can never take that for granted. You just never know what's going to pop out of appropriations and get funded. And that's why it's important that people do keep the pressure on and make sure that people vote for the bill and let them know that it's not acceptable just to abstain, that we want them to vote yes. There's no reason to abstain on a bill that simply says, make sure that your trainings include the groups that are actually being discriminated against and have hate crimes against them. It seems like a no-brainer to me. But the fact that people don't want to allow anti-Semitism to be taught is very concerning to me. I think it's very important that people understand what anti-Semitism is, that it didn't begin with the Holocaust, that it's an ancient conspiracy theory that is now out in the open. All you have to do is look at Twitter. There's real people that are using their real profiles that are spouting, you know, things that a few years ago I think would have been, you know, really, you know, off limits. But we've got people at high levels, people that have big platforms who are promoting anti-Semitic memes, who are promoting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, whether it's about who's controlling the media or controlling the means of capital. It's very dangerous, and it's not something that we should give on, an inch.
Yes, your passion's coming through, and I hope your colleagues hear you. Can you tell us just in, less than 30 seconds, last question, what's needed to get the bill across the finish line?
So when you come to Sacramento next Monday, you'll have the chance to testify in person to urge the Senate Appropriations Committee to pass the bill. Once that happens, it goes to the Senate floor in mid to late August for a vote by the entire Senate. We need to make sure that all the senators vote for this bill so that when it gets to the Senate floor. And I know that JPAC will organize opportunities for people to weigh in, and we'll also need to make sure that we weigh in with the governor, because at the end of the day, if the governor does not sign the bill, it does not become law.
Thank you for all of your amazing work on this, your leadership, and just for leading this bill and your moral clarity. It's just what we need. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of the Jewish community. Thank you. And I'm going to pass it back to David, who's going to take it from here.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you so much, Assemblymember, for your work and your leadership on this bill. You heard from both Joy and the Assemblymember about the hurdles that this bill faces in the next few weeks, and we'll explain at the end some very specific action items that you can take both now and in the coming weeks to help get this bill signed into law. So we will, in the meantime, move to our second bill, SB 1287, which continues our theme of addressing campus anti-Semitism, this time through codes of conduct policies. So I'm pleased to introduce Kendall Kosai, ADL's Director of Policy, who will be in conversation with the bill's author, Senator Steve Glazer.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate that. And as David mentioned, we'll be continuing to speak about campus anti-Semitism with SB 1287. Since the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack on Israel, we have seen an anti-Semitic activity grow on college campuses across the country. According to ADL's own audit of anti-Semitic incidences on college campuses grew 321% from 2022 to 2023. In addition, a study conducted by ADL recently found that anti-Jewish attitudes are present with more than a quarter of students on California campuses agreeing with the dual loyalty trope. Today, I am so pleased to be here in conversation with Senator Steve Glazer. Senator Glazer is the California State Senator from the 7th District and a member of the Jewish Caucus. Thank you for joining us. My first question to you is, will you share what precisely this bill does to counter campus anti-Semitism?
Great. Thank you, Kendall. And let me just add my thanks to all the participants. I was scrolling to the names of folks who have joined, some of whom I know and many that I do not, but I know you're taking time out of your day. And there's so much angst in our world that you being a part of this conversation and a part of our action efforts, I hope gives you some comfort that we're making a difference, and you are making a difference. So thank you for being a part of it. So Senate Bill 1287 does 4 things. First, it requests that the University of California, and it requires the California State University and the community colleges to adopt and enforce policies in the Student Code of Conduct that prohibit violence, harassment, intimidation, and discrimination that create a hostile environment on the campus and interferes with First Amendment rights. That's the first thing the bill does. Second, it requires campuses to develop or enforce content-neutral, reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. Third, it requires the development of mandatory training programs on how to engage respectfully. And finally, the bill asks, as a condition of enrollment on a campus, that each student acknowledge the campus's code of conduct.
Great, thank you for that. And so you have over 40 major Jewish organizations in support of this bill, and that's probably a big reason why it's passed through the Senate committees, the Senate floor, now through the policy committees in the Assembly. But this bill has faced some pretty stiff opposition throughout its journey, as you know, and the opposition is unfortunately getting louder. And it looks like there are really 2 camps of opposition, right? The free speech absolutists like the ACLU and a coalition of far left activists. We'll get to the free speech question in a minute. I'm sure you're excited to talk about that, but really start with the far left activist coalition that are opposing this bill. So this far left group is being led by the usual suspects, who have unfortunately recruited a number of well-meaning but perhaps misguided groups into their cause, like the UAW UC Student Association and others. Can you talk about why these community-based groups are pushing so hard against this bill?
Well, they are pushing hard. It seems to be part of a broader activism that we've seen on the campuses and in other political elements of our life. And their voices, unfortunately, are quite loud. You know, we have had dozens of, many of them students, come and testify in opposition to this bill as it's moved along the way in the legislative process. And they even come up to the podium as primary witnesses against the bill and repeat a lot of the anti-Semitic tropes that are being said on campuses. In fact, at one hearing on the assembly side, I pointed out that what the opposition just said is factually false and anti-Semitic, but they have every right to say it, and they would have every right to say it under my bill on a campus. But the far left has really, I think, surprised many of us to see that type of, I would call it pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic activism and opposition that has shown itself in opposition to this bill.
And so I know you've been working with JPAC and ADL and Hillel International and constitutional experts on this bill to make sure it doesn't infringe on First Amendment rights. And to be fair, that's always a concern that we have when we're working in these spaces, right? And so with so many issues at the table in the final months of the session, can you talk a little bit about the ACLU's engagement on this bill and the steps that you've taken to alleviate their concerns?
Great, thank you, Kendall. And let me just say that Hillel International and their lawyers have been incredibly valuable partners in the development of this bill, and as well as your group, the ADL and JPAC, and other legal experts. And all of us are sensitive to the First Amendment issues of free speech. And what the smarter people than me, the lawyers, have made clear to me is that we can protect free speech, but free speech is not unlimited. And there's a lot of protections that the court, under existing legal opinions, have granted in circumstances, including on campuses, on university campuses. There is some protection that everyone has for the First Amendment. And that's just not the ability to say whatever you want to say, but to protect another person's right to say whatever they want to say and to be free of intimidation and harassment and violence. So the biggest concern has been the First Amendment. We've made concessions. For example, let me give you an example. We had a provision in the bill that said if you call for genocide, that would be a violation of the bill. We took that out. Now, why was it in the bill? It was in the bill because I think many of the people listening have, recall seeing the congressional testimony of those university presidents where they were asked if someone called for genocide, did it violate the code of conduct on your campuses, and all the hedging and hemming and hawing that happened, given the clear intent of those who were advocating such a thing. But we've made some compromises, and here's what we did. We've defined a call for genocide in a different way. We talk about it now. We've made amendments that the ACLU wanted us to make, although it hasn't satisfied them, that we define a hostile environment as a substitute for the call for genocide, which we think accomplishes all the things that we wanted to accomplish without that term of art in the bill. And, we did get it out of very liberal committees of the legislature, the last one being the Assembly Judiciary Committee. They're a check on what's considered constitutional or not constitutional. Ultimately, a federal court would decide that. But we have no interest in moving a bill that's going to be found unconstitutional. So we felt we made as many concessions as we could, and we think that the bill will stand up. It did get 11 votes in the Assembly Judiciary Committee, including a vote from a Republican, only one abstention, which is basically a no vote. So we think we have shown the ACLU we're operating in good faith. They're a very principled organization. I'm sure there are people on this Zoom who are members of the ACLU. They do a lot of good work, but they have a very exacting standard that we have tried to meet. I'll give you one last example, Kendall. one of the things that was concerning was that they felt that a code of conduct that a student has to sign would create a chilling effect on free speech. Now, I don't agree with that. But in a concession to the chair of the committee, we agreed to have a student acknowledge the code of conduct as a condition of enrollment, not a commitment to follow the code of conduct. We think we get all the benefits from that acknowledgement without the higher standard that we had in the bill. So another example of our efforts to try to find common ground with the ACLU. At the end of the day, they're still opposed, but we think we meet all the First Amendment tests that they and we would like to see.
Yeah, no, I think from the ADL perspective, we certainly appreciate that as well. And I think to hit it home even further, the ACLU acknowledged again that you've taken a number of amendments to either ease their free speech concerns, but again, they remain opposed because you haven't quite agreed to 100% of their demands. But I think, most reasonable folks can agree with you that you've made a good faith effort to come at least halfway here and compromise on this bill. So, but again, we know the ACLU obviously has a lot of influence in the Capitol. And so even their opposition is in principle, there are plenty of legislators who weigh their opinion heavily, right? Which poses a major challenge for this bill in particular. So can you tell us about what types of organizing efforts have taken place so far and what we really need to do to, in the final few weeks of the session, to push this across the finish line?
Well, first, let me again acknowledge and thank JPAC and the Federation and your group, as well as Philel and my colleagues in the Legislative Jewish Caucus. We had Assemblymember Gabriel on, a chair of our caucus on. I think a Senator Wiener, another co-chair, is going to come on in a few minutes. We have such a great leadership in the legislature, in the Legislative Jewish Caucus. We're larger than we've ever been, and it certainly has helped as we try to move this bill with the opposition that we've identified thus far. But it's in the Assembly Appropriations Committee, and that's chaired by Assemblymember Buckwitz. And if we get through that the second week in August, it will come to the floor of the Assembly in the third or fourth week of August, and then back to the Senate for concurrence. So we're on the final stretch. I know you're going to get into that more detail in just a few minutes. But you have made a difference. I'm told over 1,200 of you participated in the action alert to get the bill out of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. That's a lot of folks, and it made a big difference. That 11-0 vote is an indication of that. So those are the challenges we have in the next literally few weeks. So I hope folks will stay engaged as JPAC under the JPAC's guidance so that we can get this across the finish line. I mean, it's been embarrassing, hasn't it, Kendall, to see what's happened on our campuses? Really, I mean, it's not just the things that are said, but the acquiescence to this militant activism, shutting down campuses, stopping Jewish students from being able to go to class, to the library. In fact, there was just a federal court decision in LA yesterday or the day before that acknowledged that the campuses really came up short in protecting all students' rights to participate in their education experiences. So we see the problem. This bill, I think, goes a long way to doing what we're allowed to do under the First Amendment. We hope people will stay engaged and supportive of it.
Well, thank you so much, Senator. We so appreciate your leadership, the caucus's leadership, and really pushing this forward. There's clearly been a lot of work being done both behind the scenes and in the public square to get this bill across the finish line, and it's clear that the community's engagement has made a difference, as you just mentioned. So we'll talk a little bit later about the specific actions you can take now to reach the Appropriations Committee, as you had mentioned, and then how JPAC will reach out to many of you who are on this webinar ahead of the Senate and Assembly floor votes. So one other note here: once the bill passes out of the legislature, similar to what we just talked about in the previous bill, we'll need your help to urge the governor to sign it, obviously. And the governor made reference to campus codes of conduct in his Golden State Plan to counter anti-Semitism earlier this year. And so while we're optimistic and believe that this is in alignment with that plan, we're also hopeful that he'll be supportive of this bill. But we don't leave any stone unturned, right? And so JPAC will also organize a writing campaign to the governor on all these items when they hit his desk in September. So thank you again, Senator Glazer, for your advocacy. And with that, I will pass it back to David.
Thank you, Kendall. Thank you, Senator Glazer. That was really helpful and I think a really important call to action. But both of these conversations leave us with, I think, the right context to move into action. And as with AB 2925, we will share specific actions you can all take to make your voice heard later in the hour. All three of these bills face tough opposition. But as you'll realize, each bill is facing fiercer challenges than the previous one. So we'll need to work hard on all of them with an extra oomph for SB 1287 and our biggest push for our third and final bill around ethnic studies. This issue is so important that JPAC has formed an ethnic studies coalition with over 30 Jewish organizations as part of it. And one of the goals of this coalition is to think about how to address this issue systemically through statewide legislation. So we're really excited to be working with Assemblymember Zbur on AB 2918 and to take us through that conversation. I'm pleased to introduce Mara Lande, Jewish Federation Los Angeles' Vice President of Government Affairs and the bill's author, Assemblymember Rick Chavez Zbur.
Thank you, David, and Assemblymember, thank you for joining us today. The Assemblymember is responsible for some very critical and significant areas here in Los Angeles. He oversees areas including Beverly Hills, Santa Monica, and Westwood. So yes, he was also very busy with all the incidents taking place at UCLA. He's also a fierce advocate in several intersectional spaces, serving on the California Latino Caucus, LGBTQ Caucus, and as an ally on the California Jewish Caucus. So very grateful for your work and for you being here with us today. I was asked to offer just a brief background on the ethnic studies issue because it has been brewing for so long, and there were a lot of things that led up to this moment of you authoring this bill. Back in 2019, the state unveiled the first draft of a K-12 ethnic studies model curriculum, and unfortunately was very problematic. It included deeply anti-Semitic and anti-Israel content. It also erased the Jewish American experience and some experiences of other communities who raised similar concerns. Our community did intensive advocacy work, and this led to the State Board of Education calling for significant revisions. And this resulted in a much more transparent process and ultimately a revised model curriculum that was free of discriminatory content and inclusive of the Jewish American experience. But unfortunately, that wasn't the end of this story. The legislature did pass AB 101, which required all schools to actively implement ethnic studies in their curriculum. However, the bill allows schools to use the updated model or adopt their own curriculum. And unfortunately, this has left a void and many classrooms susceptible for that original biased content to return back into the classroom. And many of those authors of the original rejected curriculum have continued to approach classrooms and insert that curriculum. So with that said, Assemblymember, we've been playing whack-a-mole at the community level in many of these schools, and you've been working tirelessly for a legislative fix. Can you talk to us about AB 2918 and how it aims to address this problem and how it's beginning to chip away at some of these guardrail issues that we've been seeing?
Well, so first of all, thank you, Mara, for moderating this. I also want to thank David and JPAC and the other organizations in the coalition, and obviously the members of the Jewish Caucus who work so hard to really advance the interests of the communities in a very difficult time and in very courageous ways. So one of the things, as you know, is that AB 101 gave local school districts an incredible amount of flexibility in terms of what appears in the classroom without a lot of oversight. And so despite the development of a model curriculum that addressed many of the concerns that the Jewish community was raising with the prior curriculum, that curriculum is not required to be implemented. It's really pretty skeletal in terms of what can be taught in the classroom. And so we continue to have school districts that are creating curriculum that's problematic and anti-Semitic. And we actually have folks that are peddling instructional materials to these school districts who even claim to use the model curriculum framework, which results in problematic and anti-Semitic curriculum. And often what happens is that parents don't find out about it until it's being taught in the schools. So this bill attempts to address those issues in two ways. First, it attempts to make sure that parents in school districts that are adopting ethnic studies courses have noticed that the curriculum is being adopted have the ability to review it and have the ability to provide input to the school districts before it's adopted. These local transparency procedures would apply to any new curriculum being adopted in a school district and to changes in curriculum that was previously adopted. So if a school district was using the model curriculum framework, actually came in and decided to make changes to it, to add things to it, that would actually be subject to these transparency procedures. The second thing that the bill does is it attempts to strengthen guardrails, the guardrails you referred to that were adopted under AB 101. There are two guardrails, key guardrails that currently exist. One requires that the curriculum be appropriate for use with pupils of all races, religions, nationalities, genders, sexual orientations, and diverse ethnic and cultural backgrounds, pupils with disabilities, and English learners. And then there's another guardrail that requires that the curriculum not reflect or promote directly or indirectly any bias, bigotry, or discrimination against any person or group of persons on the basis of any protected category. Both of these guardrails obviously were carefully negotiated in AB 101. The Jewish Caucus was heavily involved in making sure that these guardrails were inserted. In fact, I think that happened because of the Jewish Caucus. But we've also found that the guardrails need to be strengthened in order to protect to make sure that the spirit of the guardrails is actually taking place in our classrooms. One of the things that proponents of the liberated ethnic studies approach have commonly done is they point to Jewish people and groups that don't represent mainstream views of the Jewish community to justify curriculum that the community would view as anti-Semitic and problematic. So one of the things we're doing is we're proposing to strengthen the guardrails by adding language that incorporates the concept of cultural competency and adds an additional guardrail that promotes multicultural respect. So on the first one, that basically the first strengthening of the guardrails by adding language related to cultural competency, what that would require is that a school board take into account the views of communities that are the subject of the curriculum and instructional material taught under the ethnic studies courses. So it would require a school board to basically say, if you're teaching, if the curriculum impacts or is about the Jewish community or Israel, it would actually require them to think about the views of the community that's impacted as they're making determinations of whether or not it's biased or it's appropriate to teach in the classroom. So that would apply to the two guardrails that I talked about. And then the bill would add a third guardrail, which would set as a goal that the curriculum and instructional materials teach multicultural respect and acceptance and focus on the histories, cultures, and domestic struggles and contributions to American society of historically marginalized communities in the US. So that would really focus on making this more about multiculturalism, multicultural respect, and about the domestic experience of marginalized communities. So this bill would strengthen those guardrails, and we believe would meet the spirit of the guardrails that were negotiated under AB 101 by preventing bias and discrimination against all racial, ethnic, and religious communities that under the bill. And similar to, I think, the concepts that Assemblymember Friedman was talking about, the bill doesn't talk specifically about anti-Semitism. It talks about really looking at curriculum that affects marginalized communities and actually would give Jewish communities a voice as these curriculums are adopted at the local level. It's important to note that because ethnic studies is unlike other K through 12 subject matter in California, there is no state-approved framework or standards, only this model curriculum, which leaves a lot of leeway at the local jurisdiction. And there's really no serious protection against bias or discrimination entering the classroom under the current laws that have been adopted. So the goal of the bill is to ensure that communities that benefit from or are negatively impacted by the curriculum have a voice in shaping the curriculum that impacts their communities. We want a rigorous ethnic studies course is taught in our classroom that brings people together and teaches respect for all communities. And we believe that this bill ensures that ethnic communities, all ethnic communities, including Jewish community, have a say in how their experience and their history is taught.
Those would be tremendous changes and scaffolding that is much needed in the guardrails. I know that this bill that you introduced was gotten amended, and so you're up against a really tough truncated timeline. You also had I think a tougher committee meeting that you had to go through as well. Can you give us a little insight about what this process has looked like given what you're up against, and maybe B, kind of the role that opposition is playing for you? It's obviously been a theme through all of these bills. What are they saying, and how are you navigating that negotiating with your colleagues?
So, we're on a very strict legislative schedule. This is a bill that is actually, the term of art is that it's a gut and amend. And so what happened is, new bills need to be introduced by mid-February. We were not this is a caucus priority bill. And so the caucus was really focusing on what should be included in this bill. And so we decided that we needed some time before we made the bill public. And so we decided to do it as a gut and amend. So essentially what happened is we took one of my bills that was about barber's licenses and replaced it with language that was in this ethics studies bill. The barbershop bill had already made it through assembly committees and had passed off the assembly floor. And so we made it a completely new bill when it came to the Senate. And now it's faced one vote in its current form in the Senate Education Committee earlier this month, the committee hearing that you talked about the day before we went on summer recess. So the process is a little bit clunky because senators were trying to wrap their heads around something that was significant that actually had not had a policy review in the Assembly. That's one of the challenges of this bill, is that we're actually going through the policy work in a truncated way on the Senate side, and we're having to bring it back to the Assembly. A major challenge with gut and amend bills is that we have to educate our colleagues about the context of this bill in a much more truncated timeline. So the next steps are that we need to get it passed through the Senate Appropriations Committee and on the Senate floor, and then it will have to go through an Assembly committee review as well on the Assembly side. And remember, we only have 4 weeks left in the session, so all these votes are going to be happening sort of back to back in quick succession, which is why we need community support on this bill. I'm not sure if you want to, I'll sort of leave my other talks about the opposition because I know that's some content that you wanted to mention.
Thank you. Yeah, if you could share any insight on some of the specific issues that maybe the opposition is bringing up, and maybe some of the ways that they're gaining some traction, any concerns you might have there.
Well, I mean, obviously the biggest part of the opposition is coming from the Coalition for Ethnic Studies, which, prior to the Senate Education Committee hearing, put a call to action 24 hours before the committee and called AB 2918 racist and a roadblock to authentic ethics studies implementation. The leader of that Ethics Studies Coalition testified in committee in opposition. She accused the Department of Education of caving into the whims of, quote, white supremacists, right-wing, and conservative organizations, and of course, even the ADL, that was her language. And so you can sort of see the tenor of the opposition and sort of what we're facing. We've seen her and other liberated affiliated folks assume leadership now also in some of in the higher education ethics studies councils and even in some of the teachers unions. So as a result of that, the California Faculty Association has come out in opposition. We've been negotiating with the California Teachers Association and the California Federation of Teachers, which let us know early in the week that they are likely to be opposing the bill. So we've been in, and the unions are starting to, use language that's similar to what the opponents are saying. One of the things that they basically said is that ethnic studies was meant to benefit, certain communities, and that actually touching it in any way and taking away the shaping of this from the communities that it was originally focused on is something that's inappropriate and racist. Obviously our response has been, well, the curriculum includes content that is about and impacts other communities as well, and particularly the Jewish community. And while I personally agree with the principle that the ethics studies should be shaped in part by the communities that are impacted by the histories that are being told and the cultures that are being highlighted, that the same goes for the Jewish community. If we're talking about curriculum that impacts the community, is about the community, there should be a Jewish voice as part of the process. So we're in the process of negotiating with them now. One of the unions has problems with the transparency procedures in particular. I think some of those concerns are actually valid ones. What they're worried about is that higher transparency could result in MAGA forces using these local adoption procedures in inappropriate ways that harm teachers and students, and would actually oppose ethnic studies curriculum that we all in the Jewish community would think is good curriculum. So that's one of the things we're trying to grapple with in terms of the transparency piece of the curriculum. And then on the other piece, on the guardrails, you've got the other teachers union basically saying that they just don't want the curriculum to be touched at all, that we're basically putting a burden on this kind of curriculum that we don't put on other curriculum. And the reality is, one of the problems is that ethnic studies has not gone through the same bells and whistles at the state level in terms of approving all of the aspects of the curriculum and the teaching materials and the instructional materials that typically go through a back and forth with the Department of Education to make sure that it's appropriate for use in the classrooms. And we don't have that process with ethnic studies. So we're trying to do things that actually substitute for it, given that it wasn't originally written into the law when it was originally adopted. So as you can see, we do have some tough decisions that are coming up, and we are going to be working in the caucus to think about whether or not we have to make revisions to get at least part of the bill through this year. I was the executive director of Equality California before I was elected to the legislature, which is the statewide. It's basically the JPAC for the LGBTQ community. And one of the, we got major LGBTQ civil rights bills passed, including in the education space. And one of the things I am cognizant of is that we were never successful getting those bills passed with the opposition of the teachers union. So I think we've got really tough headwinds, but we're going to basically be doing our best to get at least elements through this cycle. And we need, the strong advocacy for from the community in order to make some progress this year.
Well, thank you, Assemblymember. If anyone can thread that needle, we know you can. And we have, while this is a sobering analysis, we know that this bill is winnable with you at the helm. I also want to make a plug, and we're about to discuss this some more, that when we got wind of the fact that the opposition had kind of mobilized right ahead of that committee meeting, we also put out a call to our community and got over 2,000 community members with under 24 hours to reach out. And I think that really made a difference. And so from this conversation, it is very clear that the status quo isn't working, and we need stronger state laws to ensure ethnic studies is implemented. Of course, this bill may not be the silver bullet, but it could make a material difference in chipping away at this issue. So if I'll hand it back over to David, and I hope we'll have more chances in the future to speak with you, Assemblymember, about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Mara, and thank you, Assemblymember Zbur. And echo what Mara just said. You are just such a champion for our community, and we're so grateful for all that you've done to push this bill forward. And just to bring out, I think what you were saying right there at the end is we need to do what we can to get this bill across the finish line. No matter what this bill looks like, it will be a boon for our community. And so we trust you, and we're looking to you to make those decisions to get it there. And we will show up in person and online over the next several weeks to try to make this happen, because anything that we can get signed into law this year will only help our work on this front. And we'll come back next year and see what more we can do as well. That was a lot. And I just want to thank all of the authors of the bills and members of the Jewish Caucus for taking us through that. I'm going to introduce Dr. Anita Friedman, Executive Director of the San Francisco-based Jewish Family and Children's Services and longtime JPAC Executive Board member, to join me as we talk about what we've been alluding to throughout this hour, which is what we can do right now. And so, Anita, why don't you just start by sharing your overall thoughts about how to take action and what's needed in this moment?
Thank you, David. The Jewish community has had to profoundly reorganize ourselves in the face of the conditions that we currently have, which are described very well by all our previous speakers. We've never faced a situation like this before. We've had to reorganize ourselves. We're fighting on many fronts. That was outlined here. And we've established a stronger Jewish Legislative Caucus, which didn't exist for the first 165 years of the legislature. We have a strong JPAC. We have a network of activists, many of whom are on this call. As we know, the central fight is for the hearts and minds of children. What's happening in the schools? What kind of indoctrination is happening in the schools? And that's why these bills are so important, both in terms of the legal front, but also in terms of the education of children and teachers to teach the subject matter. Absolutely critical. We know also over our history as Jews over thousands of years, what stands between our destruction or our ability to thrive is government. If government is with us and protects us, we can thrive. If government does not protect us, then it's time for us to relocate or we will be destroyed. And so we are very grateful to government and to all of our legislators here for standing up for democracy and for how minorities are treated in this country. We don't have a lot of time now, so we want to really focus on what's important here, which is the decision makers who are going to shape our lives need to hear from us and they need to see us. That's why it's so critical that we take action, that everybody on this call cares deeply about this issue, is involved in this issue, and we need you to take action. So David, why don't you outline of the 3 priorities that we have, what the first 2 are, and then I'll talk a minute, and I'd like to introduce the co-chair of the Jewish Legislative Caucus, Senator Scott Wiener.
Great. So thank you, Anita. There are 3 things that you can do right now. And the first 2, we'll drop them in the chat as I'm sharing them. The first 2 are 1, email the Senate Appropriations Committee, and 2, email the Assembly Appropriations Committee. Now, 3 of our 6 priority bills are going to be voted on by the Senate Appropriations Committee in a few weeks, and the other 3 will be voted on by the Assembly Appropriations Committee around the same time. So we're asking you to complete both of these action alerts right now. You can, one will go to each committee. You can click on each of the links that are being dropped in the chat by our team, and it's 1 click. You can fill them out really quickly, and they'll go to all the appropriate staff members on each committee. While I'm talking, is a great time to do it. We'll also make sure that you have these links in a follow-up email. And then I want to make a note that when you do fill out these action alerts, you'll get a confirmation email in your inbox that will tell you how to double your impact. And what it'll say is, double your impact, make a call to the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and it'll give you a phone number and explicit instructions how to do so. So I want to encourage you to do that as well. It's best to make a call to your legislative offices during office hour or during work hours. So I'd recommend doing so tomorrow between 9 and 5. But right now you can absolutely start by filling out these links. So that's 1 and 2. And then the third, I'll pass it back to Anita.
The third is absolutely critical. If you're a legislator, you know that when you see that the constituency affected by these bills shows up and speaks and stands up for what they believe in, it makes a very profound difference. So we need people to come to Sacramento on Monday. There will be opportunity to both testify at the Appropriations Committee, and you don't have to have experience doing this. Quite simple. We will prepare you. You'll stand up. You'll say your name, your affiliation, and your support for the bills. But do come because it's one of the most profound ways that we can influence decision makers. Secondly, we will also be lobbying, and we will prepare everybody there for the lobbying sessions. There'll be a group leader, and then we'll decide who speaks, and people can speak more or less. But again, meeting with a legislator to petition our government, which is a First Amendment responsibility and right, on behalf of causes that we believe in, is absolutely essential. And we also will have a chance. Also, there'll be some press conference where we will be standing with the legislators. We'll have a chance to talk with the legislators. But again, that kind of press conference and those photos send a very strong message, especially because our adversaries will be there. Our adversaries will be there in force. I've been in Sacramento when they're there in force, and we need to be there in force too. So please, if you understand, and I think that you do, how critical this moment is for the Jewish people and for our country, now is the time for you to set aside the time to show up in Sacramento. And we really encourage you to do that. We will make it easy for you. You can register in the chat, you can register online, and we look forward to seeing you there. So, David, do you have any other additions you want to make? If not, we'll introduce Senator Wiener because I think it's time.
I think it's time. The link is in the chat for you to register, and we hope to see all of you in Sacramento on Monday. Anita, take it away.
Towards this end, the partnership between the Jewish community and the reorganized, strengthened, focused Jewish community and our legislators is essential in order to protect and represent the interests of the Jewish community. And no one is more devoted to that than Senator Scott Wiener. Many of you know him. He represents San Francisco. He was previously chair of the LGBTQ caucus, and now he's co-chair with Jesse Gabriel of the Jewish caucus. He's also senior, and he's has a senior role as chair of the Senate Budget Committee. And he works with me. I was appointed by the governor to chair the Governor's Council on Holocaust and Genocide Education, along with the Attorney General and the Superintendent of Public Instruction, and is a very important force in ensuring that Holocaust education is properly taught to every child in every school district in the state of California, and that thousands of teachers are taught how to teach the subject matter and learn the lessons of the Holocaust and teach about what anti-Semitism is. If we don't capture the hearts and minds of children, the next generation are not going to be particularly sympathetic towards us. So I want to thank you, Senator Wiener. You're very involved in the bills we discussed here today, and we'd like to hear your closing comments.
Great. Thank you very much, Anita, and thank you, David. I really want to thank my colleagues, Senator Glazer, Assemblymember Zbur, and I believe Assemblymember Friedman was on previously, who are all really doing yeoman's work in authoring these really important bills. And it's an honor as co-chair of the Legislative Jewish Caucus to really have their backs and work to make sure that these priorities for the community move forward. So our Legislative Jewish Caucus, when it first started a decade ago, I believe there were 2 Jewish members of the legislature or thereabouts. We're now up to 14 plus 5 adjunct members. So our caucus is 19 strong. We're one of the largest caucuses now. And having the size that we have, it is incredibly powerful, and it really forces the institution to take us very seriously in our work speaking for the Jewish community. And boy, is it a good time given the disaster that's been unfolding in the Middle East, in Israel, in Gaza, and the West Bank, and it's just the disaster since October 7th. And it's been incredibly impactful for us to have the voice that we have, to be able to do the work for the community that we need to do. And I think, one thing that we have found that I know you are aware of, and by the way, I want to thank, I see that there are over 300 people on the Zoom, people who are working on the ground in their communities, in your communities, day in and day out, sometimes probably feeling very alone in trying to do that work. And I am so appreciative, and we're so appreciative of that. And I think what we have learned in a very clear way and seen in a very clear way since October 7th is that I think our community has been taken for granted for a long time, and that we have at times taken for granted that everything is okay for us in California and in this country. And of course, if we look at the history of Jews, we all know that it's okay until it's not okay. And we have really been able to, the mask has been pulled off, so to speak, and we see the reality of what it means to be Jewish in this country, including in California, and some of the horrific things that have been happening to our synagogues, and some of the what's being taught about Jews in very, very negative ways in our K through 12 public schools, on our university campuses, and just the brazen anti-Semitism that we're seeing, and the attempt to delegitimize the home to half of all Jews on the planet, namely Israel. And so we are working very hard in advancing the legislation that you've heard about today. We also worked very hard and successfully in the budget, both to make sure we were enduring. I was appointed budget chair this year just in time for a approximately $50 billion budget deficit. And despite that deficit, we were able to fund the nonprofit security grant program again this year to make sure that our community institutions have the support they need to be safe during difficult times. We also were able to hold the UC accountable to improve its campus climate. And so proud of the work we've been able to do. We have a lot more work ahead. Even if this war were to end tomorrow, and I pray that it does, but even if it were to end tomorrow, that work will continue, because the political shift that we've seen since October 7th, and the emboldening of just straight up anti-Semitic organizations is going to continue. And it's going to continue in terms of in our schools, on our university campuses, in just public settings. And we need to be intensely organized as a community. I am so proud of the resilience of the Jewish community and the organizing that's happened before October 7th, but certainly since October 7th. It has been incredibly just fulfilling to see the strength of our community. And so I want to thank everyone on this Zoom for the work that you've done. You'll continue to have the support and collaboration of our legislative Jewish caucus. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Wiener. Thank you to all of our speakers here today, our legislators, our colleagues. This work is just so important. So please check your emails. We'll make sure that you get all these action alerts via email as well. There are things that you can do right now. And then, of course, there will be more things that we'll ask of all of you over the coming weeks as we head to the final days of the legislative session at the end of August. Thank you all for being here, for committing to take action, and for joining us in this journey. Have a great evening.